I know we haven't done a Friday morning session before, so this is a new time for us, but I just wanted to introduce Jessica. So Jessica will be taking the session today, as you all know, as part of our commitment to further our diversity and inclusion training. We've been running different sessions over the last 6 months. So this session is going to be focused around LGBTQ+. And without further ado, I'll pass over to Jess to kick off the session.
Great, thanks for that, and thanks everybody for joining me today. As mentioned, my name is Jess, my pronouns are she, her, and I'll be doing some LGBTQ awareness training today. I will be moving quite quickly, so if you do have any questions, then please do feel free to call them out, take a step off mute and call them out, or to chuck them into the chat box. I will try and keep an eye on the chat box. One of the most important things you can do as an ally is to learn, to learn more information about our identities and our lives. And if you don't ask questions, you won't learn. So do feel free to, no matter what your question is, feel free to ask it. One of the most important things I can do is create that space where you can ask questions. So please do feel free. Doesn't matter how basic you might think it is or anything like that. If you don't ask questions, you won't learn. And I would like you to ask anything you'd like to know. I will also be sharing some stories throughout the training. So some of them are mine, some of them are not. The stories that are not mine, I do have permission to share them. And also for anybody who is LGBTQ on the line as well, I do just want to call out, we'll be talking about homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. So if you do feel that you need to leave the training for a little bit, please feel free to do so. Also, do feel free to leave your cameras on. I've spent the last almost 3 years now staring at my own face on a screen when I deliver training, so it's always really nice to see that there are people out there. I promise if you're still working along while you're listening, I won't be insulted that you're not looking directly at me. It's just nice to see that there are other people out there. Okay. You should be able to see my slides. Let me know if you can't. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all dialing in from. So I'm joining you from Awabakal land. I would like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. The content of this training does raise anything for you, then please don't keep it to yourself. Please reach out. There are national organisations listed on the screen now that can provide you with any support that you do need. I just want to touch on these words on the screen now, because quite often when we're talking about workplaces, these words are often used a little bit interchangeably about workplaces and the kind of culture that is set in workplaces. And really, they're not the same. Really, there is one that we should be working towards. So the first word I want to touch on is tolerance. So when you think about things you tolerate, they're things you put up with because you have to, but you don't necessarily like them. So, you know, we tolerate going to the dentist because we want healthy teeth, or we tolerate the morning commute because we have to get to work. We put up with them because we have to, but we don't necessarily like them. And so we talk about a workplace being tolerant for LGBTQ people or of LGBTQ people. It isn't really one where it's safe, because what it's implying is I'm putting up with you because you're here, but I don't like you and I don't agree with who you are. So not a safe space for LGBTQ people to be working in. Acceptance, definitely more positive. I'd definitely rather be accepted than tolerated. But the thing about acceptance is it is a passive thing. It is something that takes place in your mind. So I can look at all of you on the screen, or I can walk into a room and I can look at everybody around and go, yep, I accept everybody here. But nobody knows that because nobody can read my mind. Inclusion, however, is an active word. You have to do something to be inclusive. You can't just think inclusion. You have to show it, whether it's through your language or your actions. You have to do something to be inclusive. And so that's what we want to be working towards as a workplace, is that through our actions, through our language, we are showing that we are allies for our LGBTQ colleagues, and this is a safe space for them to be working. They can bring their whole selves to work, and it's not going to have a negative impact on their career progression or their workplace experience. So as an example, so I'm a celiac. I can't have anything with gluten in it. If I do have anything with gluten in it, then it makes me sick. So let's pretend I've I've just started working with you, and you know, someone decides, okay, we're going to have a morning tea to welcome the new person. We're going to have some cakes and coffee and tea and that kind of thing. The person that's organising it, I go up to them and let them know, just so you know, I'm a celiac. I can't have anything with gluten in it. And they say, yep, no problem, understood. I accept that you're a celiac. I go away thinking, great, got it sorted. Turn up on the day to the morning tea, and everything, all the cakes, all the biscuits, everything there has gluten in it. And I go up to the person who organised it and says, well, I can't eat any of this. It makes me sick. I did tell you that I'm a celiac and I need something without gluten in it. And they're like, yeah, I accept that you're a celiac. I accept that you can't eat gluten. I'm not being excluded from the space. I can still be there, but I can't be there in a safe way. I can't participate in the same activities as everybody else because it's not safe for me to do so, because if I do, I'm going to end up being sick. That is acceptance. Yes, you are fine to be here, but you can't participate in the same way as everybody else. Inclusion would have been making sure that there was something there that I could eat that wouldn't make me sick. So that's the difference when we're talking about acceptance and inclusion. Acceptance is okay. Acceptance means I'm probably going to be okay in that space, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to feel safe there all of the time. I'm going to be able to participate in the conversations or talk about my life or my relationships in the same way as non-LGBTQ people. Inclusion is making it clear through our actions and our words that LGBTQ people are safe. I also want to touch on a couple of points on this slide because we still get a little bit of pushback sometimes about this conversation. Why are we having this conversation? It's not an appropriate conversation for the workplace. I believe that it's wrong to be LGBTQ, or I don't believe that you can be LGBTQ, and you're trying to change my beliefs. And that definitely isn't what we are talking about when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion. People are free to hold whatever belief they would like to. Whether you agree with it or not, whether I agree with it or not, whether the organisation agrees with it or not. People are free to hold whatever belief they would like. The issue is when their beliefs impact on their workplace behaviours so that they are not respecting the information, the relationships, the identities of their LGBTQ colleagues in the same way as they do their non-LGBTQ colleagues. And really, regardless of what your beliefs are, just respecting someone is the most basic thing that we can do in the workplace. Using their correct name, not misgendering them, not misgendering their partner, that kind of thing. Whether we agree with them or not, whether we agree with who they are or not, the most basic thing that we can do for each other in the workplace to just get along and have a harmonious and like a good day for everybody is just to respect each other and use the correct information. And so that is what we always bring it back to. It is not about somebody's beliefs. They can believe whatever they want. There may be people there may be people you work with, there may even be some people on the call today. They're a little bit like, I'm not sure about this LGBTQ thing. They are free to hold that belief. But if it does mean that their workplace behaviours are different between their LGBTQ colleagues and their non-LGBTQ colleagues, that is what we are addressing. I just want to touch on that last one. So LGBTQ inclusion is about creating an inclusive culture for all LGBTQ employees, regardless of whether or not they are out in the workplace. There's lots of reasons why someone may not be out. They may have had a really bad experience in a previous workplace and they're not sure what the culture is like here. Is it safe to be out, or am I going to have a similar kind of experience? Maybe they're a little bit younger. We know that the 18 to 24 age group is the least likely to be out at work. And so especially for those of you that work with the grads or the younger people, that's something to keep in mind, that they are less likely to come out at work. Or maybe they just don't want to. Maybe they're a little bit more private. Wouldn't matter if they were LGBTQ. They're just not interested in talking about their life outside work, what they do on the weekend. They just want to come to work, do their job, go home. So there's lots of reasons why people may not be out. It's never our job to force anybody out. All we need to be doing is creating that safe workplace so if and when they do want to come out, they know that it'll be okay to do so. So why are we having this conversation? Why are we talking about LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace? We got marriage equality back in Australia in 2017. Surely everything is great. Surely everything is fine. Well, the thing is, everybody has a sexual orientation and everybody has a gender identity, whether you've thought about that before or not. Being straight is a sexual orientation. Identifying as a man or a woman is a gender identity. And those aspects to your identity come with you everywhere you go. You don't get up in the morning, have a shower, get dressed, have your breakfast, have a coffee, take out your sexual orientation and leave it on the bench. It comes with you. And so if you go to work and you're straight and you talk about your partner, you are talking about your sexual orientation. It's just that the sexual orientation, the gender identity of LGBTQ people, we are taught is something we should hide away, something we shouldn't talk about, something that's inappropriate for the workplace. And maybe stop you here and say, well, hang on, Jess, it's 2022. Nobody cares. Nobody cares if you're LGBTQ. All we want is for you to come to work and do a good job, and that's all anybody cares about. Well, I was speaking with a young man not long ago. So he's in his mid-20s. He works at a law firm in Sydney. When he started there, he didn't tell them he's a gay, didn't come out, wasn't sure what the culture was like. But eventually him and his boyfriend decided they were going to get married, and he thought, if I was straight and I got engaged, I would go to work and I would let everybody know. So I should be able to do the same thing. So that's what he did. Went to work the next day, found his manager and said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm engaged and I'm marrying a man because I'm gay. And his manager said to him, do not talk about it at work. Definitely don't tell the clients. They may not want to work with a gay man. You'll scare them off and we'll lose the business. It's not a conversation from the 80s or the 90s. This is a conversation from now. We are still being told our identities, our relationships make us unequal of the same rights and protections as everyone else, are things we should hide away, things that will scare people off. A woman I was speaking to not long ago told me that when she told her mother that she is a lesbian, her mum said to her, her own daughter, her mum said, I would rather you told me you were dying. I have friends that were kicked out of home when they came out to their parents. I have friends that have been excluded from their churches and other places of worship. I have a friend that started their own church because they couldn't find a space where they felt safe and affirmed and able to worship God. This is the extent that we have to go to find spaces that we are safe in. I have friends that are continually misgendered, either because their gender expression falls outside what we as a society say is the norm, or as a way of denying them their gender identity if they're trans and gender diverse. So many of us are carrying around a great deal of lived experience of exclusion and rejection, and that comes with us everywhere we go and every time we meet somebody new. And on the screen now is some data that speaks to that coming out experience. So each year, Pride and Diversity runs the Australian Workplace Equality Index, which is like a benchmarking tool to show you kind of where you're at in terms of LGBTQ inclusion. At the same time, we also run an employee survey. So the survey asks the respondents about their thoughts about the LGBTQ inclusion work that their organisation does, and also asks the LGBTQ respondents about their experiences in the workplace. This year we had about 45,000 respondents total, and about 8,500 said they were LGBTQ. So a very large, very robust survey. Of the people this year that said they have a diverse sexual orientation, 59% says they're out to most people that they work with. So 59% said, when they come to work, they feel pretty comfortable that most of the people they work with, they can talk about their life outside work, what they did on the weekend, their partner, that kind of thing, and the reaction's not going to be a bad one. That still means 41% of people with a diverse sexual orientation are only out to a few or not at all. 41% of people are not out to most of the people that they work with. 41% of people are coming to work and feeling like they can't talk about what they did on the weekend or who they did it with, who their partner is. Or if they are asked questions about their partner, maybe they're lying, saying they don't have a partner or changing their partner's name and their pronouns and their gender. 43% of people with a diverse gender identity agree that most people they work with are aware of their gender diversity. And then down the bottom, you can see the stats around the unwanted jokes, innuendo, and negative commentary LGBTQ people experience that targets their sexuality and targets their gender identity. Now, if we were all in a room together, I would be asking for a volunteer. Because we're not in a room and it doesn't work as well over Teams, I'm not going to ask for volunteers, so you can all relax. But if we were all in a room together, I would be asking for someone to come up to the front of the room who is straight and in a relationship. And we're going to pretend it's their first day working with us. And we are going to ask them some questions to get to know them. Our volunteer has three questions when, our volunteer has three rules when they're answering our questions. So they can't reveal their sexual orientations. They can't answer in a way that lets us know that they're straight. They can't reveal the gender of anybody they're talking about, in particular their partner. And they also can't lie. We have no rules, and so we can ask whatever we want. And this exercise is to show the experience that LGBTQ people go through every time we meet somebody new. So, because when you think about it, it doesn't take long for questions to start to become quite personal. Obviously we're all working in the same organization, but you might ask what department they're in, who their manager is. You might ask where they worked previously, if they've just moved to the area, where are you living? Do you have a partner? Has your partner found a job? Do you have kids? Are they in school? It starts to become about questions start to become about somebody's life outside of work quite quickly. And when you're not sure if it is safe to answer those questions honestly, what do you do? How do you answer them? You may not want to lie. Nobody really wants to lie. But also maybe it's not safe to give the correct information about your partner or your family. And sometimes, maybe it's a woman who's come up to the front of the room as our volunteer, and so she's got a man who is her partner. Rather than using he, him pronouns, she might try and use they or them instead. So, more gender neutral pronouns. It doesn't tend to be the way people talk about their partner if that's not their correct pronouns. Most people will use he, him, or she, or her. So that kind of stands out. It's a little bit different. Why are they using those particular pronouns? Answers also tend to become very monosyllabic, because if you're not sure, if you don't want to give away too much information, you'll start to just use very short sentences or only one word answers. As an example, so when I'm asked, do you have any kids? I answer, yep, I've got a little boy and a little girl. In our scenario, our volunteer, do you have any kids? Yep. That's not really a way that we tend to converse with each other. We tend to give a little bit of information so that another question can be asked, to make the conversation sort of flow. But in this situation, because we don't want to be asked any questions, we try to shut down any further questioning. And when we get to the end of the activity and we ask our volunteer, how did that feel? It was hard. I had to think about everything. It was a little bit tiring because I couldn't just answer. I had to stop, make sure that my answer wasn't going to give anything away. And when we asked the audience, how did it feel trying to get to know them? It felt like they were being secretive. It felt like they were hiding something. It felt like they were thinking about everything before they answered. You can see them stop and pause for a second while they think about what they're going to say. Again, we don't tend to do that. Someone asks you a question, you answer it. You ask one back and then they answer it. And that's how the back and forth goes. And this is why it's so important, because we are looking for cues and clues that this is a safe environment. This is why it's so important that there are those visible signs of inclusion, because we are continuously scanning to determine, are there allies in this space? And if this is a safe space for me to come out. Because coming out is never a one-time thing. I have to decide whether to come out every single time I meet somebody. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but LGBTQ people have super gay eyesight and super gay hearing. Now, super gay eyesight means 50 meters across a crowded room, I can see your rainbow lanyard. I can see your rainbow pin. I can see your ally sticker on the back of your laptop. My eyesight is so good, I can see your rainbow socks. And if I am seeing those signs of inclusion, what it's doing is putting a tick in my mind to say, yes, this could be a safe space. It may be safe to come out here. My super gay hearing means 50 meters across the same crowded room, I can hear the word gay, or I can hear the word dyke, and I'm immediately listening into that conversation. How are those words being used? Is it an inappropriate joke or comment? And if it is anybody calling it out? And if nobody's calling it out, what it's doing is putting a cross in my mind to say, no, do not come out here. If things go bad, nobody will have your back. So we're really hypersensitive to those cues about whether there are allies in this space. And if I am hearing those inappropriate jokes and comments and nobody's calling it out, what it's doing is reinforcing all of those instances of exclusion that I've experienced throughout my life. If I was to come and work with you today, this would not be my first day of being gay. I've got years and years of micro and macro aggressions I have experienced that I bring with me. And when I talk about aggressions, I don't mean that I get chased down the street or I get beaten up, even though those things definitely do still happen. But as an example, so an ex-girlfriend and I were walking past an apartment building one day. There was a party going on inside one of the apartments. There was some people standing out on the balcony. As we walked past, we were holding hands, not doing anything outrageous or outlandish, just holding hands, having a chat as we walked down the street. And the people in the apartment saw us. And so they thought they would comment on it. Look, those two women, they're holding hands. They must be lesbians. Look, two lesbians. So we, of course, stop holding hands. And so then they comment on that. Oh, look, those two lesbians, they're not holding hands anymore. Ha, 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 we made those two lesbians stop holding hands. Aren't we funny? And then we get out of there as quickly as we can. I live up in Newcastle, and there's a suburb up here called Mayfield. And it's a pretty LGBTQ friendly suburb. There's a lot of LGBTQ people that live there. There's a lot of queer families. We expect it to be a pretty safe space. So a friend of mine, again, just walking down the street, holding her girlfriend's hands, just chatting, not doing anything outrageous. A car drives past, a guy leans out of the window, and as they go past, he yells, "Dykes!" and they speed off. So for those of you that are straight, how many times have you been existing in the world with your partner, holding their hand, maybe giving them a hug, giving them a kiss, and people have felt the need to comment on it, point at it, laugh at it, or scream at you out of a car? Probably it doesn't happen. Probably as a straight couple, you're able to exist in the world and nobody ever looks twice at you. Nobody ever lets you know you're different in a world that doesn't always like your difference. And as an organisation, you do have a responsibility to be creating both a physically and mentally healthy workplace for your colleagues. So a study out of the US in 2016 found the words "that's so gay" when used to describe something negative impacted on the LGBTQ people that heard it to the point they started experiencing migraines and anxiety. And maybe you say here, well, hang on, Jess, it's just a phrase. I don't mean it like that. It's just a phrase. Don't be so sensitive. And I get it. I was at school in the late 90s. I was at uni in the early 2000s. My friends didn't like a teacher, didn't like an assignment, arguing with another student. That's gay, that's gay, that's gay. And as I got older and I felt more confident to call it out and say, you shouldn't say that, they would tell me, I don't mean it like that. I don't mean that I don't like gay people and this is bad and, you know, they're equally as bad, and that's not how I mean it. It's just a phrase. And I get it. I believe them. I do not think their conscious thought process was gays are bad and this is bad and so therefore they're the same thing. I do not think that was their conscious thought process. But that almost makes it worse because their homophobia is so internalized, they don't even realize that's what they're doing because they're not using their sexual orientation to refer to something they don't like. They're using mine. If your LGBTQ colleagues don't feel safe, they will leave. So you'll have a much higher staff turnover rate and you'll lose some really great colleagues that way. It will lead to diminished team cohesion. So that self-editing exercise that we spoke about on the previous slide, if I don't want to answer questions because I either don't feel safe or I'm not sure it's safe to answer them honestly, I'm going to start to remove myself from situations where I might be asked questions. So, you know, Monday morning coffees, lunch times, stand-up meetings, afternoon drinks, all those times where we kind of just stand around and have a bit of a chat and ask each other, you know, learn a bit more about each other. I'm going to start to avoid those situations or deflect questions when they do come up. Over time, the team is going to notice that I exclude myself, and so they're going to start to exclude me. They're just going to stop asking me to things. But now when we have to come together and work as a team on a project, how well do you think that's going to go when there's not that element of trust there? It is also a risk to employee productivity and engagement. So in our survey, not only do we ask how out are you at work, we also ask how productive, how engaged, how mentally well do you feel at work? You know, probably unsurprisingly, those people that are completely out at work say they feel more productive, more engaged, they feel more a sense of belonging, they feel more included in the team. Those that are not out, answer you know, they are less likely to agree with those things. And it's probably not a surprise, you know, if you can be out at work, if you're not having to worry about being asked a question or having to self-edit or lie about your life outside work, it means you can just focus on your job. You're not anticipating that next question. You're not thinking, how do I look today? Do I look gay? Have I been using my hands too much? Did I use the wrong pronoun? Did somebody notice? Are they talking about me? If you don't have to worry about all of that, you can just focus on your job. Okay, so the heteronormative binary, I'll break that down a little bit for you. So heterosexual or straight, normative, statistical norm, so most people are straight, and then binary, two choices, one or the other, this or that. And here, those choices are now on your screen, conveniently color-coded in blue and pink. So when my little brother was born, the doctor took a look and said, it's a boy. So he was assigned male, expected to grow up to be a man, express his gender in a masculine way and be attracted to women. When I was born, the doctor took a look and said, it's a girl. So I was assigned female, expected to grow up to be a woman, express my gender in a feminine way and be attracted to men. Probably a lot of you can look at those two lines and see yourself in it. Probably a lot of you can look at those two lines and say, yep, I feel pretty comfortable there. And that is absolutely okay. Even if you don't recognize yourself in it, you would recognize it from the media that we consume every single day. So movies, there will be the pretty, feminine, damsel in distress rescued by the tall, dark, handsome, masculine hero. TV shows, if there's a couple, it'll be a straight couple working through the trials and tribulations of life. Ads on TV, mum, dad, 2 kids, dog. When I was growing up, my favorite thing to do was read. All I wanted to do was read. I used to read so much that when I was naughty, hard to believe, I know, but when I was naughty and my mum wanted to punish me, she'd send me outside rather than to my room because that's where my books were and I just read, and that's not a punishment. When I look back on those books now, I never saw myself represented in them. As I was coming to understand that I'm gay, I never saw myself in those books, whether it was the young adult books when I was younger or the adult books as I was older. Every character in them was straight. And representation is vitally important. Representation, first of all, lets us know You know, those feelings you're having, those thoughts, those experiences, they're all okay because other people have them too. It also teaches us about the kind of life we can have and the kind of relationships and how to be in those relationships safely. But when this is all you see, and this was when I was growing up, whether it was the TV shows, movies, books, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my friends' parents, everywhere I looked, this is what I saw. As this is who you are, this is who you'll grow up to be, and this is how you'll act. And it never felt right to me. My gender expression has never been feminine, and I have never been attracted to men. But when it's all I see, what do I do? How do I fit myself into a world I don't see myself in? So rather than having those two lines that were on the previous slide that were very informative, you are this and so you'll grow to be that and you'll do that, we would like to suggest this model instead. So we still have the same 4 headings at the top: sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. But rather than saying that one informs and dictates what the next will be, we would like to suggest instead that they're their own 4 separate and distinct diversities. And we're going to go through them now. So sex assigned at birth. This is your physical sex characteristics. So your hormones, your chromosomes, your physical sex genitalia. It is what is used to assigning you to being either male or female when you're born. And currently in Australia, when you are born, that is all that can go on your birth certificate, is either male or female. And it is based predominantly on your external sex characteristics. So like I said earlier, my younger brother and I, the doctor took a look and said it's a boy and it's a girl respectively. So we were assigned male and female. That isn't the whole picture though. So some people are born with intersex variation. So these are physical sex characteristics that do not fit the medical norms for female or male bodies. There's at least 40 different intersex variations that we're aware of, and they can become apparent at different life stages. So it could be when someone's entering puberty and their body isn't responding based upon the sex they're assigned at birth. Could be when they're trying to have kids of their own and it's not working, they go for testing. Could be at any time they find out they have an intersex variation. A lot of people don't ever find out that they have one. The main thing I want you to remember is that an intersex variation is a variation, a physical variation to your hormones or your chromosomes or your physical sex genitalia. It has nothing to do with your gender identity. It does not dictate whether you're going to be trans or not. It has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. It does not dictate whether you're going to be gay or straight or bi or anything like that. It is a purely physical variation to your sex characteristics. Nothing to do with gender identity, nothing to do with sexual orientation. Gender identity. This is your own internal understanding or concept of yourself. So when you think of your gender, how do you understand yourself? Is it as a man, woman, non-binary, agender, that internal understanding? So because it's internal, you can't really prove it, but it can't be disproven either. So if I tell you I'm a woman, you can't look at me and read my mind and say, well, no, not Jess, you're a man. And you might say, well, you can prove it because as a woman, you can wear dresses and skirts and makeup and all those things that women are supposed to wear, but that's gender expression, and we'll get to that. First, I'd like you all to have a think. Now, think back to being a kid. When did you have that thought, I'm a boy or I'm a girl? Probably most of you don't ever remember having that thought. Probably most of you were told when you were little that you're a boy or you're a girl, and you never thought about it again. And what you were told would have been based upon the sex you were assigned at birth. So if you're assigned male, you would have been told you're a boy, and if you're assigned female, you would have been told you're a girl. So that means you're cisgender, cis being a Latin word for on the same side as. So that means your sex assigned at birth, your gender identity are on the same side, they align. That isn't everybody's experience though. So my older brother was assigned female at birth, but as he grew up, understood himself to be a man, so he's transgender, trans being a Latin word for on the opposite side of. Kids as young as 3 can start to understand gender and start to put words and language around their gender. So some of you may have watched Neighbours when it was on the TV. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask any of you to out yourselves as former Neighbours watchers. So those of you that did watch Neighbours, you may have heard of the actor Georgie Stone. So when Georgie was assigned male at birth, but when she was 2.5, she told her mum, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. And her mum did what parents of all toddlers would do. You know, I've got a toddler. Some of the things that come out of his mouth, I'm just like, where did you pick that up? Because we've never said that at home. Where has this come up from? And just kind of, Georgie's mum did what all of us would do. Oh, okay, go off and play. Just kind of didn't really pay much attention to it. Just kind of thought, oh, it's just a kid saying kid stuff. But as Georgie got older, she kept insisting, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Got to the stage where Georgie was 8 years old and coming home from school every day with wet pants. Because when Georgie was at school and needed to use the toilet, she couldn't go into the boys because only boys go in there. And she knew she wasn't a boy. But she couldn't go to the girls because everybody told her, well, not only girls go in there and you're a boy. But she knew she wasn't a boy. So there was no way that Georgie felt like she would go to the toilet. So she would wet her pants every single day. Thankfully and luckily for Georgie, her parents accepted and understood that they could not let that continue to go on. And so they agreed that she could affirm her gender. So for someone of Georgie's age, that was just in a social way. So they changed her name, changed her pronouns, and changed her appearance. And so because they did that, because Georgie's parents believed her and affirmed her, and very importantly, also found a school that would believe Georgie, she's now in her early 20s, living her life as the woman she always knew herself to be. There are lots of different ways that people may affirm their gender. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. There's no checklist that people need to work through. Some people will do all of the steps. Some people only do some of the steps. People do them in different orders. There is no right or wrong way. As allies for our trans colleagues, all we need to do is support them through whichever steps they choose to take, which are right for them. So in addition to those social steps that I just mentioned, there's medical steps such as taking hormones and having surgery. There's legal steps such as changing your legal sex and name in official documents like your birth certificate. Depending on the state you're in dictates how easy or hard it is to change your birth certificate. So in New South Wales and Queensland, for example, you still have to undergo medical affirmation. You still have to go through gender affirming surgery in order to be able to change your birth certificate. The other jurisdictions in Australia, you no longer have to do that. So Victoria was the last one to change, I think, a couple of years ago. There's lots of reasons why people may not undergo medical affirmation. There is a huge cost barrier. You are looking at tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what you want to do. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars. And in Australia, it is all out of pocket expenses. None of it is covered by Medicare. There's a huge geographical barrier. Like I mentioned earlier, I live in Newcastle. We're only about 90 minutes from Sydney. We're not a small town. I think we're the second or third largest city in New South Wales. And yet even up here, I would struggle to find a GP that has adequate knowledge in this area, let alone a specialist that could help me with whichever steps I want to take. Any specialists that are up here are booked out for months and months and months. Almost everybody still needs to travel to Sydney. We know that trans people are not only more likely to be underemployed, but also unemployed than the general population. So when there is already these huge cost associated with gender affirming medical care, now you've got to add in all of those travel costs, and it will be repeated travel costs. This is not a one-time thing. Gender affirming care can take a long time. So for a lot of people, even if they do want to access medical care, it's out of their reach financially. Or maybe they just don't want to. Not all trans people want to affirm their gender medically. Some just are happy doing it in a social way. That does not mean they are not the gender or they're less of the gender they're telling us they are. They just don't want to do any of the medical stuff. But when there is this requirement in order to be able to change your birth certificate, it means you are not going to be able to get your ID to match your affirmed gender. You're going to have to out yourself every single time you present ID. I worked at the election back in May, and I was on the declaration desk, which is where you come when your details, your address on the electoral roll does not match your current address. And so I finished helping the person I was helping. They walked away. I called out next, and the person walking towards me looked a little bit nervous, kind of a little bit jumpy. And as she got closer to me, I could tell she was a trans woman early in her gender affirmation. On the desk, we ask you for ID. You can still vote even if you don't have ID, but it just makes it easier for us to copy down all of the details that we need from you. So I asked her for her ID, and she handed it over. And as soon as I saw it, I could see why she was feeling a little bit nervous, because she had not yet managed to change her driver's license. It was still a man's name that was on there. And I looked up at her and I could almost see the thoughts racing through her mind. You know, what was this person going to do? Were they going to say something? Were they going to make a big deal? Were they going to tell the person next to them? Maybe even were they going to stop me from voting because my ID clearly does not match my affirmed gender? And of course, I didn't do any of those things. I just took down her details, gave her the voting forms, told her where to vote, told her to come back to me when she was done, just treated her the same as I would anybody else. But the point is that people just don't know. Trans people in particular just do not know what somebody's reaction is going to be. Are they going to say something? Are they going to make a big deal? Are they going to stop me from doing whatever it is I'm trying to do? Most of us that day probably lined up 5-10 minutes maybe, went in, voted, walked out, got our sausage sizzle, went home, never thought about it again for the rest of the day. We just did it and then didn't think about it again. For trans people, especially when they can't get their ID to match their affirmed gender, creates all these things that we just do and never even think about, creates these huge anxiety-ridden cycles, just full of stress because they just don't know what someone's reaction is going to be. So not only should we be trying to act as allies for our trans colleagues, but we should be trying to help our organisations to identify where these roadblocks do exist and try to help remove them where we can. Now, before I go into this slide, I do just want to mention that there is some data on here around violence, depression and suicide, and I will be speaking to those statistics. So gender incongruence, you may be more familiar with gender dysphoria. So up until 2019, the World Health Organization classified being trans as a mental illness. So up until 2019, if you went to a doctor and said you were trans, you're classified as being mentally ill. In 2019, the World Health Organization reclassified it to a sexual health issue, and so gender dysphoria became gender incongruence. So this is when there's a disconnect between your experienced gender and the sex you're assigned at birth. So there is social incongruence or social dysphoria. So this is when the world looks at you and perceives you to be a particular gender. My older brother didn't affirm his gender till he was close to 40. So he had, 4 decades of the world looking at him and perceiving him to be, a girl and then a woman, and addressing him as such, she, her, miss, ma'am, that kind of thing. Then there's body dysphoria or body incongruence. This is when you might see yourself when you're naked or you see a reflection in a mirror and your body doesn't look like how you know it should. Not all trans people will experience dysphoria, but many will. And for those that do, it can contribute to poorer mental health outcomes. Added to that is the appalling way that we treat transgender diverse people. So the study on your screen now, half the trans respondents had experienced verbal abuse and social exclusion. Almost half had experienced sexual assault. A third had experienced threats of violence, and almost 1 in 5 had experienced physical attacks. And so it's no wonder that 53% of trans men, 55% of trans women, and 51% of non-binary people are diagnosed or treated for depression. And they aren't depressed because they're trans. They're depressed because of the way that we treat them. You can see the rates of violence that the trans community experiences on your screen now. It's the way that we don't believe them. We tell them that they're confused or it's a stage and they'll grow out of it. They're just gay and they don't want to be. We talk about their gender as though we know more about it than they do. Or we want them to prove it. If you're really telling us you're a woman, then you need to act like this, otherwise it's not real. It's the way that they're presented in the media. It's hard enough to find positive representation of people with a diverse sexual orientation, let alone diverse gender identity. And when trans characters are there, overwhelmingly, it is negative representation. Overwhelmingly, if there is a trans character, they'll be, the villain. They'll be the one doing all the bad things, or they'll be being treated by a doctor in some way. So they'll be, locked up in a facility maybe or something like that. Or by the end of the show, they wind up dead. I was reading an article a little while ago, and the author of the piece is trans. And she was saying, as she was growing up and coming to this understanding about herself, she looked for other trans people because she wanted to see people with a similar experience to her. And she couldn't find much. But when it was there, what she saw was trans people suffering. What she saw was trans people in mental facilities under the care of doctors or dying young. And so that's what she thought her life was going to be like. She did not understand that she could have as happy and healthy a life and as happy and healthy relationships as everybody else, because she had never seen a happy trans person. All she had seen was trans people suffering. And this really goes back to that conversation we're having earlier about the impact of representation and its importance. because it lets us know not only are we okay, but that our lives can be okay as well. We can have happy lives and we can have healthy and safe relationships. We don't have to suffer just because we're LGBTQ. And just as alarmingly as that half of trans young people have attempted suicide. There is something that we can be doing, though, that has literally zero impact on our life, but will have a massive effect on the mental health of your trans friends, family, and colleagues. So by using someone's affirmed name and pronouns, we can help to reduce depression symptoms by 71%, thoughts of suicide by 34%, and suicide attempts by 65%, just by using someone's correct name and pronouns. And that shouldn't really come as a surprise. You know, if you were to go away today and talk about this training, you might say something like, the trainer Jess, she said this, this, and this. So when you're referring to me, how do you do it? You use my name and you use my pronouns, two pieces of information that I've given you that speaks to my identity. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise that when we do that for trans people, it has such a big impact. And it doesn't matter to anyone else what someone's name and pronouns are. If I had come here today and said that my name was Jeff and that my pronouns are he, him, your life would go on in exactly the same way after today's training as my name being Jess and my pronouns being she, her. So it doesn't really matter to anyone what someone else's pronouns and name are. And putting in place those high levels of social support, so doing those things that George's parents did for her, you know, believing her, affirming her, finding a school that would also believe her, we can help to reduce suicide attempts in trans young people by 82%. So the words that have just appeared in that blue box, so between man and woman. So the people on the screen now, how many of you, if I asked you to, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to, but if I did ask you to define them, who here would feel pretty comfortable? Yep, I've heard of those words and I could probably define what they mean. I'm not going to ask you to, don't worry. You can put your hand up if you do know. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that there's only one person putting their hand up, because although trans and gender diverse people have existed for as long as humans have existed, this particular language that has just appeared in the box is newer. We've only been sort of talking about this particular language around non-binary and gender diverse identities, you know, fairly recently. So it doesn't surprise me that maybe it's a bit unfamiliar to a lot of you. You might have heard of them, but you don't really kind of know what they mean. So I am going to provide some definitions for those words, but just remember this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of language out there that people will use about their identities. So if ever anybody uses language that you're not sure what it means, the best person to tell you is that person. So you can ask respectfully, you know, how do I use that language correctly? Or what does that language mean for you? That way they can tell you and you can feel confident in what that word means. So non-binary means there is the binary of man and woman, and my gender identity is outside of that binary. So I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, or I'm not wholly one of those two things. Genderqueer is very similar. And really before non-binary became more common, genderqueer tended to be used as a bit of an umbrella term for anybody whose gender identity was outside of the binary of man and woman. So genderqueer, very similar to non-binary. I'm outside of that binary of man and woman. Gender fluid means my gender identity is not static, it can change, it's fluid. Bigender, so one person, two genders. And then agender means I'm genderless. I have no gender. I'm completely outside of the gender spectrum. Sometimes when I start to talk about transgender diverse identities, people can tell me, hang on, Jess, that doesn't make sense. You're born a boy, you're going to be a man. You're born a girl, you're going to be a woman. That's it. That's all there is. But whether you look historically or currently, there's hundreds of communities around the world that have a very different understanding to this binary that we have placed on ourselves. So the Bugis people of Indonesia have 3 sexes and 5 gender identities. In the Philippines, bakala is a Tagalog term to refer to someone who was assigned male at birth, but has assumed the social roles and mannerisms of a woman. And that language has existed for centuries as another gender option. In North America, particularly in Canada, there are 2-spirit people in their First Nations communities. And so especially if you have been to Canada, you might have seen the LGBTQ acronym. You might have seen it with either 2S or TS. So that's for 2-spirit. So this is, you know, one person, 2 spirits. And those spirits can have both masculine and feminine characteristics. And so that person can fulfill both male and female roles within the community. And so if you were to go to someone who is two-spirit and say, no, that doesn't make sense, you can't be two spirits, they would look at you with that same kind of incomprehension and say, well, of course I can be two-spirit. I know who I am. I know my own identity. Gender expression. This is everything we do to present ourselves externally to the world. So it's how we dress, how do we do our hair, do we wear makeup, accessories, how do we walk, how do we talk, how do we gesture when we're talking. All those things we do to present externally. And so of these four, it's the only one we can see. And so of these four, it's the one that we use to make assumptions about people. And you do it. I do it. Everybody makes assumptions. I'm not going to tell you to never make another assumption because that would be completely impossible because everybody makes assumptions. But what I would like you to start thinking about is how you can start to make space for the people that would fall outside of the assumptions that you're making about them. So best data we have, at least 11% of the population is LGBTQ, and it's really hard to be accurate because it requires people to self-ID, and currently sexual orientation and gender identity is not captured in the census or anything like that, so it's really hard to get accurate data, but best guess is 11%. And also more likely if somebody is younger. So, you know, people that are sort of less than 35, much more likely to identify as being LGBTQ. So at least 11%, and much more likely if you're talking to someone who's younger. Those people will fall outside of the assumptions you're making about them. As an example, so like I mentioned earlier, I've got 2 kids. So before our daughter was born, I took the car to get the second car seat installed. And so parked in the installation bay, got out, was having a chat with the person who was going to install the car seat. And at some point in the conversation, as happens almost every single time I meet somebody, she misgenders my partner. So she asked me something like, what does your husband do? As soon as she did that, my mind immediately starts racing. Do I correct her? Do I not correct her? I'm never going to see her again. Does it really matter? If I do correct her and things go bad, is there somebody here who'll help me? So my mind immediately starts racing with all those questions that I have to decide now on this spot. Is it safe for me to come out or not? In this instance, I decided not to. In this instance, I decided the potential consequences if she doesn't like LGBTQ people or she doesn't agree with 2 women having children, that we're depriving them of a father, that we should be ashamed of ourselves, you know, the potential for that to happen outweighed my need for her to use the correct pronouns about my partner. So in this case, I decided I just let it go. There was a very small change she could have made to her language, though, that would have had a very big impact on me. So rather than saying, what does your husband do? She could have said, what does your partner do? Even if she's made that assumption about what the gender of my partner will be, she's not putting that burden on me to have to decide whether to correct her, because nobody likes being corrected. Even if she didn't really care that we're LGBTQ, even if that wasn't an issue for her, nobody likes to be corrected. Our sort of natural response to being corrected is to get defensive, you know, even if it was only a little bit defensive. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I made an assumption, you know, I know that people aren't always straight. Our natural reaction is to start to try to justify it or to get defensive in some way. So even if being LGBTQ wasn't an issue, nobody likes being corrected. So it's always going to be awkward in some way. So rather than putting that burden on me to have to decide, do I want to go through that or not? By using that more inclusive language, she's giving me that opportunity to just let her know in an easy conversational way the correct information, because she's indicating to me, I know not all relationships are straight ones, and I know not all people are straight. So, you know, what does your partner do? Oh, she does this, this, and this. So it's just an easy conversation rather than me having to go through that whole, do I out myself, do I not out myself, rigmarole. And really those rules that we use, and there are rules whether we like to admit it or not. You know, if you thought about a senior manager who is a man and he turned up to work tomorrow in a dress, we would all think that's a little bit strange because in Australia, men don't wear dresses. But those rules that we use to police each other and how we dress and how we act are dependent not only on the country you live in, but even the time you live in. So in Scotland, there is an item of clothing that we would look at and go, well, that's a skirt. But there it's very common for men to wear kilts. Fellow Great British Bake Off watchers will know, episode 1 of this year's season, there was a Scottish man on TV wearing a kilt, national TV wearing a kilt. But we would look at that and go, well, that's a skirt. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who's a fairly recent US president, only about 100 years ago, there are photos of him as a boy, again, in items of clothing that we would look at and go, well, that's a dress. But then it was very common for boys to be dressed that way. Some of you may already know that pink used to be the colour for boys and blue used to be the colour for girls, and at some point it switched. High heels were first worn by Persian cavalry 1,000 years ago. So manly men, off to do manly war things, were wearing high heels. And again, at some point, it changed. So we make the rules and we change them when it suits us. That also means we choose to apply the rules. Equally, that means we could choose not to. We could decide that people should just be able to dress in whatever way feels right to them. And those rules do start to get taught to us at a very young age. So I have a nephew, he's in school now, but he was in daycare a few years ago and his favourite colour is pink. Wore a pink t-shirt to daycare one day. One of the other kids told him he can't wear that. Boys don't wear pink. Only 4 years old at that stage, and already those kids are learning there's a correct way for boys to dress, there's a correct way for girls to dress. Just like every other kid in the world at that time, he was obsessed with the movie Frozen. Pretty sure if he could have been Elsa, he would have been Elsa. He had all of the merch. He had the dolls, he had the Lego, he had the makeup table. He'd sit there and pretend to put makeup on while he sang along to all of the songs, which of course he knew by heart. And then one day he saw an Elsa dress in Target, begged his mum to get it for him, took it home, took all his other clothes off, put this Elsa dress on, middle of winter. All he wants to do is wear this princess dress. And of course he wants to wear it to daycare the next day. And his mum had to tell him no. And not because she didn't want him to. You know, she loves the way he expresses himself. She loves that he likes to go to the barber and get his hair done. She loves that he likes to go to the nail salon with her and get his nails done. She loves that he likes to wear princess dresses. But she knew if she let him wear the Elsa dress to daycare, the other kids would tease him and make him feel ashamed until he took it off. Because already, at only 4 years old, those kids are learning there's a correct way for boys to dress and act, and there's a correct way for girls to dress and act, and we don't like it when you mix those things up. And maybe you say here, well, hang on, Jess, they're kids. It's what they do. They tease each other. That wouldn't happen in the real world. At a previous place of employment, I was in middle management, and I went for a promotion to a more senior manager role. And I didn't get the promotion, so I went to my manager for feedback. And one of the reasons I was given, and not the only reason, but one of the reasons I was given. So my gender expression, not feminine, sort of androgynous, veering towards masculine, depending on the situation I'm in. You know, I got married in a suit, for example. The two interviewers were two senior women who were very feminine in their gender expression. They told my manager they couldn't relate to me as a woman in a senior management role because of the way I dress. In other words, my manager said to me, dress less gay. Again, this is not a conversation from the 80s or the 90s. This is a conversation from now. We are being told our identities, the way that we express ourselves. We're doing it wrong. It's inappropriate for the workplace. If you want to get ahead, you need to change. And we would all have examples, whether we're LGBTQ or not, we would all have examples from throughout our lives where we have been policed because of the way that we've acted or the way that we've dressed. For those of you that were boys, maybe you've been upset. Maybe you got hurt or you were being bullied. Harden up. Boys don't cry. For those of you that are women, maybe be more assertive in the workplace. Don't be so aggressive. We would all have examples of where we have been policed because the way that we have dressed or the way that we have acted is not the way that women are supposed to do it or that men are supposed to do it. Before we move on to sexual orientation, I'd like you all to have a think. You know, if there were no rules, if we didn't police each other, what would you like to wear? How would you like to dress? Maybe what would you like to just even talk to your friends about? I was speaking with one of my members not long ago, and he, you know how you press flowers together to dry them out? He does that, and then he makes cards for his wife for, you know, birthday, Mother's Day, and that kind of thing. Doesn't tell his friends that he does that. Men don't do crafts. Little girls do crafts. Women do crafts. Men don't do crafts. And if you are, there must be something wrong. And what's wrong? You must be gay. Making cards for his wife, and he doesn't tell his friends because he doesn't want them to think he's gay. Wouldn't it be nice if there were no rules and we could all just dress and act in the way that felt right to each of us? Sexual orientation. So this is who you have a sexual attraction to. The words on the screen now in that green box. Again, just a show of hands. Again, I'm not going to, so don't worry. But if I did ask you to define them, who here feels like they could have a pretty good go at some of those words? So a few more hands that time. A few nods. I am not surprised because we have been talking about the sexual orientation spectrum for longer than the gender identity spectrum. So those words in that green box, probably a little bit more familiar to more of you than what was the words that were in that blue box. Again, I am going to provide some definitions, but again, this is not an exhaustive list. If anybody ever uses language you're not sure about, the best person to tell you how to use that language correctly is that person. So just ask respectfully. So bisexual historically has meant I'm attracted to my own gender and the opposite. So as a woman, I would be attracted to women and men. Pansexual means I may be attracted to someone regardless of their gender identity. So as a lesbian, the people I'm attracted to are other women. Someone who is pan, it wouldn't matter if that person is a woman, man, non-binary, agender. Their gender does not play a part in whether I may be attracted to them or not. It is about them as a person. Gender is irrelevant. It wouldn't matter what their gender is. It's about them as a person. Some bi people are now meaning bi in a way, I'm attracted to my own gender and to other genders. So again, this is making space for non-binary people and acknowledging that there is more than two genders. And also, I think, trying to start that conversation of, is there really such a thing as opposite genders? Is a man really the opposite of a woman? Does that really make sense when you stop to think about it? Or are they just two different genders? Asexual means I don't experience sexual attraction to anyone, regardless of their gender identity. And then queer. Queer is a bit of a funny one because there isn't really a hard and fast definition. I guess it really kind of means whatever the person who's using it means. So if I said I'm queer, I mean it as in I'm a lesbian woman. If I was non-binary and asexual, I would mean, if I said I was queer, I would mean it in I'm non-binary and asexual. So it kind of doesn't really mean one thing. It can mean whatever the person who's using it means. The closest you could get would be anybody who is not cisgender and anybody who is not straight may say that they are queer. So I do, whether it's about myself or the community, I use it a lot. Sorry, one second. Sorry, I have two children in daycare, so I'm permanently sick. So yeah, anybody who is not cisgender and anybody who is not straight may say that they're queer. However, some older people definitely won't. So I've got a friend who's close to 60. She flinches every time she hears it. Some of the older relationship managers are older gay men. Again, they never use that word because for them, it was the word that was screamed in your face right before you had your head kicked in back in the 80s and the 90s. So for a lot of older LGBTQ people, it can be quite triggering. It's a problematic word. So in terms of whether you should use it, take your cue from the person you're talking to. So if we were having a chat and I mentioned that I'm queer, I refer to the queer community, that's an indicator that you could use that language. If you're talking to my friend or talking to some of the other relationship managers, they would definitely not use that language. They would use other language. So just listen to the language they're using, use that same language. Of course, if anybody on the line is LGBTQ and you use the word queer about yourself, I am not telling you not to use that word. This is for the non-LGBTQ people. Gay and lesbian, I'm assuming you know. Just a note on the word gay. Not all women like the word lesbian. Some will use will describe themselves as a gay woman. So if you do hear the word gay, don't assume it's a man. Could be a woman as well. So now you can see those two lines we had at the start. That heteronormative binary, not really adequate for the diversity of identities in the world we actually live in. Sometimes people can see this word cloud and say, Jess, that's too hard. It's so messy. It's so busy. I'm never going to remember all of that. Those two lines, that was easy. I could remember two lines. This, too hard. But if I was to change those four headers up the top to sex assigned at birth. Sorry, if I was to change this one at the top to country of birth, age, occupation, and hobbies. And I told you I was born in Spain, I'm 17, I work at KFC, and I play soccer. There was literally billions of combinations I could have given you then. If I went around the room now and asked everybody to answer those 4 questions, we would have a different set of answers from every single person. And yet each person's answers wouldn't blow any of our minds. You know, if I gave you those 4 answers, you would sort of just take them on board, process them. The next time you saw me, you know, and you might ask me, am I going to uni next year, or am I playing soccer on the weekend, or that kind of thing. This is just 4 more pieces of information to learn about someone. And yes, some of it may be newer, especially some of those concepts we talked about, gender identity. Some of it may be newer, and new things can feel scary or confronting or confusing. That is okay. The point is to do a little bit of self-education, a little bit of active listening to LGBTQ people, to increase your understanding around these aspects to people's identities. You all have an answer to these 4 questions as well. It's not just LGBTQ people that have sex characteristics, a gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. You all have one of those as well. And so, you know, like I said, with a little bit of self-education, a little bit of active listening, we can break outside of that binary way of thinking and make space for the diversity of characteristics for all of our colleagues. Now, the terminology on the screen now, so I just want to do a bit of a check to see how we're going. So first of all, a lot of it we have been through, but maybe you missed it the first time, or you want me to define it again. So is there any words on there that you think, oh, I can't remember what that was, can you define it again? Some of it I haven't defined, so can you find those words? And then a couple of words in there are a little bit inappropriate, so we would not use them anymore. So can you pick out those words? And this is where I start to do a pop quiz if nobody says anything. Yes. You will just need to take yourself off mute. Or type it in the chat box.
You're on live. Hello. I don't think I heard the definition of sister girl or brother boy, or lifestyle necessarily, or preference. I think that's maybe gay women, gender diverse. But yeah, I think that's it. And bi gender.
So sister girl and brother boy are words used by some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to refer to people who are trans. So sister girl would be an Aboriginal woman who is trans, brother boy would be an Aboriginal man who is trans. Important to note, it's only some communities that use it that way. So you'd find it up in northern Queensland, for example. Maybe not so much in Tassie. Some communities use it just to refer to someone who is a friend. So a sister girl would be an Aboriginal woman who's a friend, brother boy would be an Aboriginal man who's a friend. So it's like all language, it's not simple. Different people will use it in different ways, so it's important to always understand the context of it if you do hear it being used before you start making any assumptions about people's identities. Gay woman is just, not all women like the word lesbian, so some will refer to themselves as a gay woman instead. Bi gender, you didn't fall into our trap. Quite often when people see that word, they think it says big ender, and I always get a little bit of a giggle when someone asks me what big ender means. But bi gender is so one person, 2 genders. And gender diverse is pretty much whenever your gender identity sort of falls outside of being a cis woman or a cis man. So anybody who is trans or non-binary or agender or bi-gender, their gender identity is gender diverse. Now, lifestyle and preference. If anybody else does want any of the others defined, then just chuck it in the chat box. But otherwise, lifestyle and preference are the problematic words, because what are those words implying?
How they live their lives for lifestyle, and then preference would be they, as in how someone lives their life, and then preference would be how someone prefers to be referred to. I'm taking a guess here.
It's saying
Yeah.
that identity is a choice.
It's a choice. Yeah. What those words, so those words have been used historically about the LGBT community. That's your gay lifestyle, or that's your sexual preference. You know, I prefer the color red. I prefer pizza to a sandwich. I prefer pasta to a bowl of veggies. That does not have anything to do with my identity. So the problem with these words is, first of all, that it's implying it's a choice. But most importantly, it's implying that you're making the wrong choice. It's just your preference. That doesn't have to be who you are. You can change it if you want. That's just your lifestyle. So it's implying it's a bad choice. You're making the wrong one. You could choose the right one if you wanted. You could choose to be normal if you wanted to be. And it's problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, there are LGBTQ people that do believe and that do say that they chose to be LGBTQ. Why do we have any sort of right to tell them that that choice is the wrong one? That they shouldn't be making that choice, that it's the bad choice, that they could choose to be normal. They don't have to be like that. Why do we have any right to say that about anybody's choice if they do believe that they are LGBTQ, that they have chosen to be LGBTQ? Secondly, I can't speak for everybody. I can only speak about myself. And I 100% believe that I was born gay. I 100% believe that I didn't make this choice, because if it was a choice, teenage Jess would have made a very different one. So I was about 8 when I started to understand that I was different to my friends. I was 10, 11, 12. They would talk about boys they liked. They would go on to date them. And that was never my experience. And yet, well into my teenage years, every night before bed, I would pray to God, begging not to be gay. Every night before bed, I would pray, please don't make me gay. I don't want to be gay. Please make me like boys. I just want to be normal. I just want to be like my friends. Every single night. And so if it was a choice, teenage Jess would not have chosen to be gay. Now, I am very lucky. I'm so happy. I am so lucky to be gay. I have a wonderful life and I have a wonderful family. But it took me a really long time to get here. Part of it was because of growing up in that heteronormative binary world where I never saw myself. I didn't understand that who I was okay. And part of it was because of growing up hearing this commentary around it's a lifestyle, it's a preference, it's a choice, and you don't have to make that choice. And so this is why if you do hear this framing, it is so important that you call it out, because it will contribute to internalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia for your LGBTQ friends and family. All right, so what's next? You've come along today and heard a little bit about what it means to be LGBTQ. What can you be doing next? Well, we do have other training sessions. So we have a session that takes a bit more of a deep dive into how to be an ally, because we often hear from our allies that the main thing they're sort of unsure to do is how to have those difficult conversations, how to call out the inappropriate jokes and comments, for example. And so we have a session that takes a bit more of a deep dive into how to do that. If anybody's in HR recruitment, we have content for you. If anybody's a people leader, we have a content for you. So we've got a number of training sessions that we can do. You can talk to your LGBTQ friends, family, and colleagues. So we are very used to answering questions about what it means to be LGBTQ. I have friends I've known for 25 years. They still ask me questions. So we are very used to educating people. So you can talk to us. As long as you're doing it respectfully, you can ask us questions. But just remember, we do a lot of educating of other people on what it's like to be LGBTQ. So sometimes we're not always in the right headspace. If that is the case, that is okay. Maybe go away, do a Google search, check in that your friend's okay a little bit later. You can read LGBTQ related publications, social media and videos. Whatever your learning style is, there is something for you. Whether you like to read things, watch things, podcasts, social media, whatever your learning style is, there is something that can give you a bit more education to help you feel more confident in this area. Promote yourself as an ally. So it is not me doing this training that changes a culture, that makes it a safe space for LGBTQ people to bring their whole selves to work. It is the allies standing up and being visible and being vocal. That is what changes a culture. I could come and I could do this training and I could talk to you about what it's like to be LGBTQ every single day. And trust me, I could. But that is not what changes a culture. Because there will always be more of you than there will ever be LGBTQ people. You will have access to more spaces than we will ever have. You can call out those comments and have more of an impact than I will ever have And most importantly, do it when I'm not there. Because it's great to do it when I am there, because it means I don't have to. But it's even more important to do it when I'm not. It's even more important because that is what lets people know. It doesn't matter if there's anybody who's LGBTQ here. I find that inappropriate, and that's not the kind of workplace that we have. Not only are you supporting us, but there's also more friends and family of LGBTQ people than there'll ever be LGBTQ people. So one of our other training sessions, we do some scenarios, and one of the scenarios we talk through. So there's two people sort of standing around waiting for the lift. There's and off to the side you can sort of see some all gender toilets going in. And the two people waiting for the lift are like, why are they putting those in? We don't even have any trans people that work here. Off to the side is a man standing on his own, and his thought bubble is, oh no, it's the family picnic next week and my son is trans. Is it safe for me to bring him now? So it is not just us that you are making your workplace safe for. You will have colleagues who have LGBTQ kids or have LGBTQ family members, and they don't ever talk about it at work because they're not sure if it's safe to do so. You know, if I talk about my trans kid, what are my colleagues going to say? So it's not just us that you're doing this work for. It's our friends and family as well. Share your story of why you're an ally. So one of our members over in WA, he had a teenage daughter and has a teenage daughter, and she needed a haircut one day. Dropped her off at the hairdresser's, went off to do some shopping. He messaged her, I'm on my way back. And she said, don't come in, wait out the front. And when she came out, he said, why didn't you want me to come in? And she said, well, I've heard the way you talk about gay people, and the hairdresser is gay. I didn't want you to say anything that would make him upset. And to his credit, he didn't think, oh, you're a teenager, what do you know? Instead, to his credit, he thought, my kid is embarrassed by me. My kid is ashamed of the things that I say and doesn't want me around. And so he went away and examined his biases and prejudices, and now is an incredibly visible and vocal ally for the LGBTQ community over in WA. For a lot of people, it is their kids that gets them thinking about this topic. You know, maybe they've got an LGBTQ kid, or maybe they've got a kid with an LGBTQ friend who they want to be able to bring home, or another family member, maybe a sibling or a cousin or a parent. A lot of older LGBTQ people didn't come out because of the age they grew up in. Some of you may have heard of the actor Elliot Page. He's a trans man, came out a couple of years ago. And when he put his post on social media, there was the usual anti-trans trolls or the usual anti-trans nonsense. And I saw someone comment saying, Elliot Page is never going to see the things you write, but your kid might. And that's one of the main things I would like you to take away from today. Whatever your thoughts are on the LGBTQ community, whatever your thoughts are on the work that your organisation does, whatever your thoughts are around if people even can be LGBTQ. Your senior leaders in your organisation probably aren't going to hear it. Celebrities definitely won't hear it. I won't hear it. I'm never going to see any of you again. The people that will hear it are the people that mean something to you. Your kids, your family, your friends, your colleagues. And you just don't know. You just don't know who might be looking for someone to say, I think I may be gay, or I think I may be trans. You just don't know. And the things that you say, but also equally the things that you don't say, the things that you don't call out, will mark you out as either someone I can come to or someone I need to hide from. And so have a think about that. Have a think about why you're here today. 90 minutes is a big chunk of your day to come along and hear about LGBTQ awareness. Why are you here today? Go away and talk about this with your teams. Tell them one thing you learned today. Go and tell your families and your friends outside work. Anything else that your organisation puts on that's LGBTQ related, turn up to it, learn something, go away and talk to your teams. Share your story of why you think people should be able to bring their whole selves to work. Talk about pronouns. So sometimes I can get asked, oh, hang on, Jess, I am a woman, I look like a woman, I use she, her pronouns. So those assumptions that people are making about me, they're correct. Do I really need to be talking about pronouns? And yes, 100%, unless for those of us who it's not important, are normalizing the conversation and normalizing sharing pronouns, it's not going to be safe for the person who maybe is using they, them pronouns and wondering, is it safe for me to let people know? Or do I need to be misgendered? So unless for those of us who it is safe to do that work and create that culture, it's not going to be possible for our non-binary colleagues to be able to tell people that correct information. And then finally, take a stand against homophobic, biphobic or transphobic slurs, jokes or negative comments. So in our survey, we do ask the LGBTQ respondents, what is it you want your allies to do? And this is always the #1 response, because it is exhausting being the one to always call those comments out. And then when you do, it gets turned around on you. Don't be the PC police. Don't be the fun police. Take a joke. Don't be so sensitive. If you do it, it means I don't have to, and I can take a break. I can have a sit down, because I know you're there and I know you got it. I'll get up and I'll continue the fight because I have to. But when I do, when I'm ready, it feels a hell of a lot better knowing that there's an army of allies behind me who'll have my back. Thank you. And any questions?
It's not a question as such, but have you, and you might not know the answer to this, but I see a lot of chat around using pronouns in email signatures. And I haven't seen any, and I'm talking to our team, have we seen any firms in the legal industry do this, or is it too, I don't know, I feel like a lot of old law don't sort of want to play in that space. Like, is there, you know, how would you bridge a conversation like that about including that on, you know, internal and external communications?
Hayley, Norton Rose do that.
Do that?
It's yeah, it's optional.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, Melbourne, I don't know if you're on mute. No, all good. Well, thank you, Jessica. That was really great, really interesting. I think we all learned so much, and there's so much more to learn as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and for everyone for joining today. I will also share details as well. So if you do have a question that you didn't want to ask, you can definitely send that over after the session or at any point as well.
Just a note on the law firms. So there are actually a lot of law firms doing a lot of work in this space. We've got a number of law firms who are members of Pride and Diversity. So Clayton Utz is one of my members. Allen's was one of my members. So there's a number of law firms that are already doing this work. And so what I would recommend is finding contacts at those organisations, or I know that in Brisbane there's Pride Law.
Yeah, we're a partner with Pride in Law in all three, in the 2 chapters as well. So yeah,
there's also Interfirm, which in Sydney is just a bit of a drinking club, but definitely in Brisbane and Melbourne, they're doing a lot of work in the Interfirm. So if you're not already getting in touch with those guys and starting a conversation with them, they would, if you're concerned that your leadership is a little bit kind of not ready, they could definitely talk you through how to start that conversation. And of course, you could always join Pride and Diversity.
Great. All right, well, I will let everybody jump off. Yeah, thank you again. Have a lovely Friday and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Jess.
Bye.
Thanks, Jess.
Everyone.